Mexico had reportedly agreed months before its latest deal with the U.S. to stem the flow of northern moving migrants. The New York Times reports Mexican officials had agreed in March to move forces to its southern border. They made the deal with then Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. This comes as the neighboring nations released a joint statement Friday night about the new deal to head off the tariff threat. Among several changes, it said Mexico will deploy thousands of Mexican National Guard forces on its southern border in order to stem the flow of migrants from Central America. In exchange, the U.S. will not impose 5% tariffs on all Mexican imports. They were set to go into effect Monday and climb to 25% over the next few months. President Trump has been praising his administration's deal with Mexico on Twitter, but many of the details in the agreement remain unclear. The president said Sunday more on the deal will be announced at the appropriate time. For more, Washington Post reporter David Nakamura joins us now from Washington. So, David, on Face the Nation Sunday, Mexico's ambassador to the U.S. contradicted President Trump's claim that her country will start buying large amounts of U.S. agricultural products. Between that and the New York Times report, is there anything new in this deal?
You know, the problem with answering that question is the White House and the State Department, and even to some degree the Mexican government, have not given us a lot of details about what is or is not in the deal. Maybe that's because there are no more details, which would be alarming. I think there's truth to the idea that a lot of the ideas here have been on the table for months. It's not a surprise the numbers at the border are going up. It's not a surprise that the president wants better trade terms. And the question is how much of this purported new agreement that was announced Friday is in fact something that is brand new, something that is dramatically different, and something that could really make a difference at the border. I think there is pressure on Mexico, and Mexico understands they need to do something to help the United States deal with the number of migrants at the border, of Central American families that are seeking asylum in the United States. The question is, how quickly can they sort of do something to bring down these numbers? It's important to the president's agenda, his own re-election chances, possibly his messaging, but also, of course, the humanitarian crisis that's going on. And so I think the answer is going to be less in the spin that's going on now and more at the end of the month and the following months when we see the actual numbers at the border and whether the numbers drop precipitously or not.
Well, Mexico has been trying to stop the flow of migrants from Central America. Reuters reports Mexican authorities detained almost 23,000 migrants in May. That's the highest monthly total in 2019. Right. How confident is the White House that more forces at Mexico's southern border will actually deter migrants?
They're expressing a lot of confidence. I think part of what you saw was certainly the president's advisors were concerned that he was using tariffs as a threat on immigration, not only mixing the two issues, but also the idea that imposing tariffs on our biggest trading partner would undermine the U.S. economy, undermine the Mexican economy, potentially unsettling that region and leading to more immigration in the United States. So they're trying to send a signal to markets that they're not going to go forward and restore confidence in the U.S. market. But to answer your question, I mean, the Mexican government has apprehended more Central Americans in May, as you mentioned, because the numbers were so extraordinary. There were more apprehensions in May at the U.S. southern border than there have been in more than 12 years in a single month. We're on pace for over 1 million apprehensions at the southern border this year, this fiscal year, with only 4 months left in the fiscal year. That's something we have not seen in over 12 years, as I mentioned. This is a major problem, and you know, there's those who say, immigration experts, that the more the president threatens these hardline measures, the more the coyotes and the human smugglers say to folks in Central America who are thinking about making the journey, go now, because the president's trying to enact these more strict consequences, and so you got to go. And so in some ways, some say he may be propelling the problem.
Well, the president has been praising this deal over the past few days. We know that several Republican senators, however, were not on board with the tariffs. Do we know if those Republicans' objections actually pushed the White House to make the deal?
Yeah. Yes, I think the concern among Republican leaders, Marco Rubio, for example, put out a statement that he, praising the president for making this deal, but also acknowledging that he doesn't normally agree with using tariffs threats in this manner. So there was a lot of concern among Republican leadership. There was a lot of concern in the business community. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce put out a note just in the hours before the agreement was announced Friday, signed by 140 businesses, agricultural organizations, that said enacting these tariffs is a terrible idea. It's going to hurt U.S. Farmers and other agricultural workers if the president goes forward. So I think there was enormous pressure on the White House top trade advisors to the president's own son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who's, of course, a senior advisor, all pushed against the idea of going forward with these tariffs. And so I think part of what you saw, like I said, was a lot of this has been on the table. Some could be sped up by this deal in terms of the enforcement measures Mexico puts on. We don't know how well they'll work, but I think there was an idea, the president saying, we're going to make the deal now or announce this deal. And then, as you saw, he also kept the idea alive that in 90 days or more, he may come back after a few months if you don't see major reductions, if they think Mexico's not doing enough, and come back at this. But that could, again, unsettle not just markets, but the politics right now, what's happening in the president's own messaging to his own base.
David, I want to turn to some of your reporting. In a piece for the Washington Post this week, you reported on the president's adult children essentially using the state visit to the UK as a family vacation. The president's aides said past presidents brought their families on foreign trips. But what is the difference between adult and minor children when it comes to presidential travel?
I think there's two differences here, Elaine. I think that I talked to folks from the George Bush administration, the Obama administration, and said, look, just having your family involved in a state visit is not necessarily something that's untoward. I mean, this is something where, of course, the royal family is a family. They're at the table here. I think the bigger question is twofold. One is that it is adult children. The Obamas certainly brought their daughters, who were minors, on some trips as a family around the world that were part official trips and part for the family. But I think the bigger difference actually is the fact that Trump has not drawn a strict firewall between his government duties as the president of the United States, the high elected official, and the owner of Trump Organization. His sons, of course, run Trump Organization. He is still nominally the head of it. And, of course, his daughter and son-in-law work in the White House. Another person on the trip was Lara Trump, Eric Trump's wife, who is a campaign official for the president's reelection. So this is the problem, because not only are they at the table with the royalty in the UK, but, of course, the president also made and stopped 2 nights in Ireland at his own golf course. And the Irish prime minister made a big point of not wanting to meet the president there, despite Trump's interest in doing so. And they met at an airport, which is very awkward. But the idea, are they promoting their business? Is the president mingling the family duties with his own official duties and his own business? And this has continued to be a question throughout his presidency. And he's violated all sorts of presumed norms about how a president is supposed to divest maybe from his own personal financial interests in this way.
Right. Many open questions on that front. David Nakamura. David, thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.